couple of things I observed during my trip was, number one, the biggest shock for me, since day one of going into Japan was just how incredibly cheap and high quality everything are. I mean, you can get a decent meal for $5 US in Japan, and that's like a bento box with rice, a main, some appetizers, and soup. You can't even get a Starbucks in the US for that price. Business hotels can be had for 100 USD a night, and a lot of them even include breakfast and even hot springs. And if you go to the basement of a Japanese department store, it's like really the epitome of abundance, where you have the best of everything sourced around the world and it's in one place. Everything from Pierre Hermes macarons, Maria Therese tea to Joe Bouchon pastries. I mean, it's all there and right in front of you. It's cheap, it's reasonable. And I think part of the reason is the undervaluation of the currency and the deflation that's taken place in Japan since the bubble burst. And also, what happened was the so-called lackluster GDP numbers that have, shown, oh, Japan has been in deflation. But what actually happens, like productivity climbed. Japanese kept working hard. They use technology, and there's an increase in the quality of the goods and services that are not really captured by the GDP data because prices, especially wages, were suppressed in Japan. And the second thing I noticed is that while competition is really fierce in Japan, there's a lot of unwritten rules about how to conduct business in a way that's very different from Western or even Chinese style capitalism. So in Japan, I think they see companies as playing a vital role in providing goods and services that's also a social good. And there's great pride in doing good work for its own sake. Now, for example, at an inn I stayed at in the middle of the countryside, I was just amazed at how good the rice was. I asked the person, okay, well, where did you get this? It's amazing. So also sourced locally, but there's still something about when I asked press further, it turns out that the water they used for cooking the rice came from a well from a nearby temple, and someone had to literally go and fetch that water every day. Now, in North America, a McKinsey consultant would say, just turn on the tap and the staff, has to walk to the well every day. But this is how things have been done for generations. And it's part of the reason why such high quality products and services exist in Japan. There's also an obligation to take care of employees, not so much lifelong employment anymore these days, but for long tenure employees, layoffs and turnover is really not common. Employees are expected to work hard and put the company first in their lives. And the company, of course, is expected to take care of them and their families. So profits are not the entire end goal. And I would say more the stability of the company and the well-being of the employees will come before shareholder returns. And that is something as an investor that you just have to accept. Well, the good thing about that is that egregious, management stock price targeting, the stock price manipulation, getting the stock price to hit the option targets, things like that are rare in Japan. But the negative of that would be, of course, it's very hard to remove bad management or management that channel excess capital into nice buildings, employee hot spring trips, drivers, and those perks and the likes. So you just have to balance those two factors, and there's something to watch out for. Yeah, I think in general, Japanese shareholders are not very demanding when it comes to share price performance, and activism is not common, although that is changing right now slowly. There's a lot of passive shareholders who are just happy with a token dividend and shareholder gifts. So they actually send gifts to shareholders. A lot of companies will send you like a bag of rice every year. Disney, I think Japan used to send, I think, tickets to shareholders, and Disney shares are very popular in Japan, and that's one of the reasons why they were overvalued. That's another story. And in the past few years, the Tokyo Stock Exchange has been actively encouraging companies with low price book ratios and low ROE to shape up or they get kicked out of indexes. So we have been seeing a lot of positive movement for better shareholder returns in the form of unwinding cross holdings and higher dividend payouts and M&A. So those are very good things that we're seeing right now in the Japanese market. So the company we're going to focus on today is called Kadokawa, which happens to find itself involved in almost all aspects of Japanese entertainment. So before I dive into the company, I just want to give a quick shout out to Jiro-san and his team at Ferrex Partners for their presentation at Asia Summit 2025 on Alpharpolis, which operates in a very similar capacity to Kadokawa. So that presentation actually did an amazing job in outlining the potential in manga, Japanese comics and anime as cultural exports. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of what was said there, other than emphasize that with traditional television and movie viewerships on the decline, especially in the Gen Z market, anime and manga have seen double-digit growth, and it looks like this trend will continue for a long time. So the core of what Kadokawa do is that they have a publishing business and they focus on books and manga. What they do is they leverage the IP and stories from the written publications to branch into making anime, live action movies, and TV production, as well as video game development. So I think people think that as a value investor going into Japan, you tend to look for price book companies with lots of cheap assets. But I would argue that the real hidden treasure is the expanding IP library, which they're finding more and more creative ways to monetize. And I think that the company will be worth a lot more than its current market cap of about 4 billion US dollars if they have a proper digital platform to reach global audiences and to allow for proper content discovery. And if the company can't do that for whatever reason, I would argue that eventually someone else with better distribution and platform will buy them out and make better use of that IP library, just as Sony tried last year. So, how is Japanese entertainment different from what we're used to in North America, even Europe? So, one of the more pleasant surprises for me during the trip was just how ubiquitous bookstores are in Japan. I love books, I love bookstores. And there's actually like a bookstore in every mall, and even in high rent areas, like in the middle of Shibuya. Unlike bookstores in North America, they're constantly busy, and Japanese people actually buy a lot of books to just read on trains. So the light novel genre is something quite unique, and they're designed to be very light reading in a small format that you can just hold in one hand while your other hand holds a railing when you're on your commute. And more now these days, you see people reading the light novels and manga on their phones or their e-readers. And I think this is the basis of a very healthy entertainment ecosystem because you really need a why and deep base of stories to make games and movies and other content. So I would say that the Japanese ecosystem supports a lot more shots on goal in terms of their ability to try different types of stories and themes to see what works, right? And if something works, for example, like Spy Family or Ocean Coal, you simply scale it up. The story comes first, and then the production will just go into the direction that's dictated by the market. So usually a successful franchise like Ocean Coal has all the elements of having novels, having manga, having an anime series, TV series, movies, and even music. So there are songs that are specifically written for the manga and that are performed by famous Japanese pop artists. Like in the US, TV is declining as a media in Japan, but at a lot slower pace because the older population have very established habits. So each TV company like TV Asahi, Fuji Television, usually have established slots of dramas that they really need to fill every season. So a season would be usually around 10 episodes, uh, and a new one starts like 4 times a year. So NHK, the national broadcaster, is a little special in that they do a historical drama every year of around 50 episodes once a week, and then a morning drama of 15-minute episodes for housewives to watch while they prepare breakfast and bento boxes for their family. Also, a lot of low-budget movies, mostly dramas, that focus on the storyline rather than special effects and expensive action sequences are made in Japan. So I was actually surprised that more movies are made in Japan than in the US. So all of this means that there's a huge need for stories and content, and this is where Kadokawa shines. Another strange thing that I noticed in Japan was, how much physical media was still being sold. I love hanging out at the Tower Records in Shibuya and just trying out different CDs. Yeah, people still buy them in Japan, and that's one of the main ways that music is still sold. And even now, some bands have announced their new music to be just released on vinyl. I would love to be able to find a good vinyl player these days. So one bull case for companies that make physical media is if they move to digital, that would allow for much better control of the IP. And that could be a new revenue source. So think about how we all share CDs, books, and Nintendo game cartridges when we were kids, and how it is so much harder to do that now if everything is digital and linked to your personalized account. Also think about how going digital would be an immediate boost to your margins, as suddenly, you don't have cost of goods sold anymore. You don't have to carry inventory. So in terms of content itself, I think the US model focus on trying to find big mega hits. They have a preconceived notion of what would sell. So, for example, in a Marvel movie, I need to make a summer blockbuster with a budget of 1 billion, and these stars go write the script. But in Japan, the approach is different. The Japanese approach is write good stories, see what sticks and see what people like in terms of popularity of the manga or the novels, and then let the market decide. What they want to do in terms of making movies or other things out of that IP. So I think you tend to get a lot more diversity in Japanese media. So as I mentioned, Ocean on Coal is a prime example that of something that just started as a manga, like a comic book, and it's got published in a weekly magazine and eventually got made into an anime, which got really popular. The theme song to the anime was actually performed by Yoasobi, a super famous pop star in Japan. She also performed in the US, New York as well. It got like 100 million streams within 4 weeks worldwide, and still a huge hit. Amazon came along and became the exclusive worldwide distributor of the live action adaptation. And that actually helped attract a record-breaking domestic Japanese audience for Amazon Prime, and that drove the e-commerce side of Amazon's business. So really, really helped push Amazon there. So as you can see, once an IP gains in popularity, you also have the opportunity to do merchandise sales, concerts, all sorts of other events to monetize. So that is the power of the IP model. And Kadokawa, with its many divisions, is very well positioned to capitalize. So the Japanese ecosystem, I think, has three main parts: content creation, content production, and distribution. So on the creation side, I think this is where the strength of the Japanese ecosystem is. It's just the sheer amount of content that's created as a result of the market being able to support the publishing of mini novels and all sorts of literary works. That allows for the IP to be funneled into other forms of content production, whether it's anime, movies, or video games. And a successful concept then attracts an international audience and it gets distributed outside of Japan. So companies like Kadokawa and Alphapolis, well, they would take slightly different approaches to finding good content. But I think that if you have like the right idea, the right IP, everything else becomes easier. So this, I would argue, is where the biggest moat is. Production is generally the work of TV and movie studios. And in Japan, there's a very well-oiled system where you turn a script into a TV series or movie very quickly because of the sheer amount of content that needs to be produced every year. Actually, the Japanese TV stations are interesting investments because they are a cozy oligopoly with very well-established relationship with the sponsors. Right? So before every single episode of a drama that's shown on TV, you'll say, "Oh, thanks to our sponsors, Toyota, Kao, we have this show for you." And it's always the same because these relationships goes back, 50 years. So these TV stations got so cash rich that a lot of them actually branch off into investing in real estate and all sorts of other things. But the problem is like there are scandals that comes up once in a while. As you can see, sometimes the TV actresses and the weather lady, they get it. They're coerced into having dinners of these powerful executives and sponsors, and bad things happen. But in terms of where things are headed, I think the power of the big TV stations are going to weaken as viewerships decline with demographics and streaming. And streaming becomes more popular. But it's a lot easier to watch Netflix nowadays. And once a streaming platform like Netflix can support the content creation just with subscription revenue alone, you don't need to be beholden to sponsors and advertisers. So you can have edgier content that makes for better entertainment. So I would say that this mode here is getting a lot more narrow over time. And unlike North America, physical distribution is still very much alive and well in Japan. You have tons of bookstores, music stores, and monetization with the merchandise. It's very easy with all the character goods, but I would say that there's a little moat here, and it's not very interesting for investment purposes. So in terms of the value of anime and manga, a lot of these points were covered by Jiro-san's presentation on Evapolis. But I just want to emphasize that there's huge upside to anime and manga just from international expansion alone. I mean, the spread of anime these days remind me of how Hollywood took over much of the world when I was younger. So now I would say, names like Ghibli, Totoro, Doraemon, and now household names around the world. Also, what is so great about anime is that unlike TV characters, anime never gets old. I mean, if you go back and watch, Star Trek or Friends, and show that to my kid, it would feel so dated. They would want to watch it. But my kid is still watching the same Doraemon that I watched when I was a kid. Same for Gundam and all the other anime. They're still just as good. The voice actors might be different, of course, but the universe remains the same. And it's actually much richer because of the decades of additional content. And the old material will forever be a source for new material. I mean, there's just endless potentials for remakes and turning storylines into new games and media experiences. And we also have platforms like Amazon Prime and Netflix driving acceptance of real made for Japanese audience content that people overseas love. And I think that one of the reasons the Japanese creative industry has done so well overall, especially when compared to Asia, is really the strength of their copyright law. The consequences of privacy in Japan is really up there with like theft. Right? You get arrested. And as a consequence, it's actually a very common vocation for people to want to be a writer or a manga artist in Japan, and you can make a decent living, even if you're not a superstar. And that's really healthy for the ecosystem. I mean, you don't really have incentive to want to write if you know that your work will just be copied and distributed for free on the internet, like in a lot of other jurisdictions. So it's an industry, one of the biggest untapped market is simply to monetize people who are getting their content from illegal sources. As I suspect and I suspect that the manga and anime market is actually a lot bigger than what the data suggests. Just like people were downloading MP3 from Napster back in the 90s, and that killed the music industry before Spotify came along. So better access to manga and anime will actually make it unnecessary to risk getting illegal content. I mean, why bother trying to look for an MP3 on a sketchy download site? You can just stream the song instantly anytime for $15 a month. And once you unlock the content library, a lot of things are possible, right? You can get snippets of stories and post it to social media and TikTok to reach new audiences. Platforms can identify users, who like a certain genre, and you can suggest other works. AI can also make the translation painless and easy to reach different markets almost instantly. So much potential there. So Kadokawa's strengths play really well to the entertainment trends that we talked about earlier. So this company was founded after the Second World War and started life mostly as a publisher of books, and eventually grew to become a powerhouse in the Japanese media industry with a very successful game production arm as well. It is now one of the big four movie producers in Japan, and they're also branching off into online education. But what is most striking to me about this company is that they have the ability to create 6,000 IPs a year to add to their library of about 130,000 IPs. So their biggest segment is still publication and IP creation. And I would argue that that's where a large part of Kadokawa's moat is. So let's dig deeper into the details. So I would say that the moat comes from number one, curation. So it's their ability of the editors to discover talent and nurture writers to produce content that is right for the market. So, so it takes almost like a century of producing popular works for the Japanese market for them to pick up the skills, of saying, okay, this is going to work, that's not going to work. This writer has writer's block. This is how I can help that person with it. I mean, these skills are things that can only be learned on the job, sort of like an apprentice following a sushi chef, right? So I would say that this approach is actually the direct opposite of Alphapolis, which takes on a more crowdsourcing approach, which I would argue have a lot less of a moat. I mean, right now, even Kadokawa has created their own platform for people to publish their own works and get rated by readers. But what people don't realize is how much effort it takes to support writers, especially when there's demand for different sub-stories, spin-offs, and other contents for games. And this is where having a big organization, a network of editors, and prior IP and storylines that have all been there. This is where Kadokawa shines. And they also have deep relationships with distribution partners, such as bookstore chains like Staya. And unlike self-published books, Kadokawa have the marketing muscle to push for prominent product placement in these bookstores and run promotion across all the platforms. They're also fairly competent in producing their own animation and live action films as well. But I think the true standout segment is really gaming, with the success of Elden Rings, the game that combined really strong narrative storytelling with robust gameplay mechanics. So the game was developed by Kadokawa subsidiary From Software, and I actually talked about Elden Rings in my presentation on Bandai Namco, who is the publisher. And a lot of people actually called it the best video game of all time, that sold more than 30 million copies. Sony actually bought 14% of From Software in 2022 at a valuation of around 900 million. And we expect that valuation number to be much larger today because now we know that Elden Ring is a success and there'll be a pipeline of spin-offs and sequels. Kadokawa also makes their own character goods, which is a super high margin business. Basically, these are dolls and push toys, and they sell for much, much, much higher than what the cost would be to produce. The growth of that really depends on how well the IP does. They also have an education subsidiary, which is very intriguing to me because they first went into education during COVID, which I initially thought was like a prime example of diversification. Why are they going into education when they're a publisher? Turns out that there's a niche in Japan, though, for students who don't fit into the traditional school environment. And there are, of course, obvious synergies with their educational publications. Growth has actually been quite robust, and they're actually profitable. So, this is something worth watching. Also nice is that they have a school for people who want to enter the gaming and anime industry. That's definitely a niche that haven't been filled, and it actually helps them build a pipeline of talents while charging tuition for it. But I think the segment with the most potential is their web services, where they have their platform for all their digitalized books, manga, and animes. The platform is called Nico Nico. Like for me, the dream would be to turn this platform into a content discovery engine like Netflix and YouTube. But right now, it's more closer to like a 1990s CD catalog from Columbia House. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So Kadokawa's business strategy really revolves around the IP library. As you can see, the IP library has 130,000 titles. That is the flywheel that drives all the other aspects of the business. And as much as I like to say Kadokawa's success is a function of creation, it's also a numbers game too. I mean, it's hard to say which content will become a hit. So the more shots on goal you have, the easier it is to find your hit, something that resonates with the audience. And once you have that, all the other aspects like production, merchandising, marketing, like it becomes so much easier. And I would argue that Kadokawa is the best in class with their deep relationship with other players in the entertainment industry and just decades of experience in terms of monetizing that IP. So we can look at ReZero as an example of how they developed the IP. So ReZero is initially a story about a lonely young man who suddenly gets transported into a fantasy world and he gets to rewind time about death. Very interesting premise. So ReZero actually started as a free novel, somewhat like the Alphopolis model of using free net publication to identify good content and just quickly monetizing it with anime, film, games, character goods. And in the beginning, Kadokawa was able to leverage their existing comic manga magazines to give ReZero the exposure it needed to gain critical mass. So once that takes off, you can start monetizing the IP from other things. So right now, most of the revenue comes from anime and films, but they also make a lot with selling merchandise as well. Notice this is like a decade-old IP, and it keeps generating income for years through sequels, spin-off, reruns, game adaptations. So I think right now they're into like season two of the anime, and there will be a season three soon coming up next year. So as I mentioned, the international popularity of manga and anime is really underestimated, with so much of the world getting their content from unofficial sources. So I think what is changing right now is that we have so much easier access with platforms such as Crunchyroll and Netflix, and that will drive a positive flywheel effect, exposing more people to Japanese culture and introducing works that they might otherwise have never heard of. All this makes it very easy for people to say, oh, I like this kind of anime, and then the recommendation engine will pop up 10 more the next time you click on Netflix. Also, AI can translate content very easily to any different language and allow works to hit the market as at pretty much at the same time as the locals see something in Japan. So that's something that is new.